welcome to the Effects Loop with Byrne. Today, you can see I got a bunch of junk on the table here. We are going to talk, this is going to be more of a talky episode than a playing episode. Actually, it's going to be all talky, no playing. But we're going to talk about pedal boards today. We're going to talk about pedal boards, a little bit about pedal order. I'm not going to get too crazy with it, but I'll get into it a little bit. And this is really just kind of demonstrating this pedal board. Because I've had some, people have mentioned to me before about this board, and they have this board and they like this board. I went through quite a few pedal boards when I was starting out, trying to find just the right thing. And I really did not want to spend like any large amount of money on a pedal board, because me personally, I don't use, at least now, I don't use more than 5 or 6 pedals at a time. Like, to me, that's a large pedal board. Because the more pedals you use, the more you start sucking like the sound quality out of your amp, basically. Like you know what I mean? Like, basically things start losing their sound quality the more pedals you add into the chain. Because you're adding more things into the chain. So it's almost like you're making your chord that much longer. So, but right here, what I got, this is called a NUX Bumblebee, actually, pedal board. And these run for around $100. They have a larger version that goes for about $150, but for me this is just the right size and I don't have a problem with that at all. I have a small One Spot Pro power supply. It's a 6 input one. What's nice about this power supply though is that it has on the bottom, you can't really see it too well there, but there's a selector switch on the bottom. And that selector switch allows you to switch between for 2 of them it's 12 and 9 volt, and for 2 of them it's 18 and 9 volt. So if you have different voltage pedals that you want to run at a higher voltage or whatnot. But okay, so let's talk about the pedal board first. What's great about this pedal board is that I think I put this Velcro on there. This Velcro, it doesn't come with the Velcro on. You have to get your Velcro separately, and then you can lay your strips of Velcro on here to the thing. What's great about it though is it's like modular. What's nice about it is, I'm not going to take the whole thing apart because it takes forever to kind of put it back together. However, you can see by looking at the sides, you can see those little bolts on the side, okay? And those little bolts, they all unscrew, and then you can take, literally the whole thing comes apart. Like the whole entire thing comes apart. And you can, there's little screw holes here, and you can adjust where you want to put the rails, like when you're putting your pedal board together. Like for me personally, I've got this set up the way that, I'm kind of used to it. Whereas the rails, they go kind of like this. Let's see, I'll show you. And you got to line up your screws here, and you get it just in the right spot, and it goes in. It's a little bit easier just to do one side and then the other side like this, and kind of get it lined up. And then once you start getting your bolts in there and your screws in there. It's easier when you loosen all the screws on this thing than it is just doing it like this. But like I said, I don't feel like taking the whole thing apart. So, this side. You can go with the pedal trains and the really expensive ones, and that's fine if that's what you're doing. If you're putting together like a big board and you want that, and you need like a huge power supply to fit underneath it and stuff, then that's great. Like if that's what you want to do, then do it, because that's what you need. But I feel like for most average players that are going to put together a 5-6 pedal board, unless you're looking to have some kind of monstrosity pedal board, that this is going to actually work perfectly fine. But yeah, just tighten these bolts back into place. That's all, and it comes with this little Allen wrench key right here. It also comes with a bag. This NUX bag right here comes with this NUX bag, which is a really nice little bag for the pedal board. It's sturdy. I've had it for a while. It's never ripped or given me any problems, so it's a decent bag. So now we'll get into like pedal order and putting together a pedal board a little bit. Just kind of a basic rundown. I mean, I know there's tons of videos like this online. I'm just do my own take here. Okay, so if I was to put together a pedal board, okay, we've got, say, like, for me, I'm gonna do 6 pedals, all right? Really only 5, because I have a buffer in my chain. I always put, and I use this TC Electronic Bonafide buffer, I always put a buffer right in the head of the chain with my TC Electronic buffer. Usually what I used to have a tuner, which was also a TC Electronic tuner, that included this buffer in the tuner, but my tuner crapped out and I have not bought a new one yet, because I have clip-ons and stuff like that, so I've been able to get away with not having to worry about buying a tuner. But I will eventually get another tuner, and that would go first in the chain for me, all right? That's how I set it up. If you're running a wah, or maybe like a fuzz pedal, or like an old school fuzz, you got to be a little careful with the buffers. Sometimes the wah and the fuzz have to go before the buffer, because what will happen is the buffer it'll mess up the sound of it and it won't sound right. It screws with your signal chain. Now, a lot of people got issues with buffers. I personally like to use them because the more stuff you link together, the further along, you know, the chain, the longer your cable capacitance gets, basically. I guess it's a capacitance is what they call it. But so yeah, so I would put my buffer pedal first, because I'm not running a wah, and any fuzz I'm running is, I think they call it silicon fuzz. So it'll run like a distortion pedal, so it can go anywhere in the chain. It doesn't really matter. But there is order to your chain, okay? Typically, if you're running an overdrive, okay? I'm gonna use this as my overdrive for today, just balls as I'm putting this board together, my Pure Sky, my Kaleen Pure Sky. Typically, you could put your overdrive pedal first, all right? Hit your overdrive pedal here, stick it in the front, no big deal. If you're running any type of modulation, this is totally up to you. Like modulation being like a flanger or a chorus pedal or something along those lines. You are going to want to decide, depending on your amp. If you're running like a Fender style amp that does not have an effects loop, and you're gonna run everything into the front, you're just gonna run a straight order. I'll show you the difference between the two. Or if you're running an amp that does have an effects loop and you like that cleaner sound that you get from the effects loop, then what you want to run your modulation style effects. Some people will run them in the effects loop, some people will run them before. I personally will run, if I was running this flanger or a chorus, I would put it before my distortion. Because then you can get, it just sounds better with the distortion. You don't get as heavy of an oscillation from, say, your flange or your chorus, but it tends to work better with the distortion. So I'm using this as a distortion pedal right now. I'm not stacking per se. Well, actually, technically I am. So I also have right here, which is a great pedal, by the way. It's a cheap pedal. I'm gonna do a video on these cheap pedals separately. But this is a Behringer Super Fuzz, okay? This thing is a jack of all trades. It is kind of in a cheap enclosure, and with cheap pedals are about 25 bucks, and these things sound great. Like, for the most part. Not all of them, some of them. But the Super Fuzz is awesome. This is kind of like the sleeper model. Like everybody wants this particular one. So they get a little bit hard to come by sometimes. Never in stock, really. Nope, didn't break it, so it's good. Let's see. So, say I was wrong. Okay, so I'd run my buffer first. Then I'd go into my flanger, okay? Now this is essentially being run as like a boost, because it has a boost mode actually, just a clean boost, an actual boost mode, and then it also has like 2 fuzz modes. So then you would run the super fuzz, your fuzz, or if you're using a boost of some sort, you can run it either before your overdrive or after your overdrive. If you run the boost before your overdrive, you are adding more saturation to the distortion. So if you want to make it so that your distortion doesn't technically get much louder, a little bit louder, but it gives you more distortion, then you would run your boost before. Now, if you wanted to run it as a solo boost, you would put your boost pedal after your overdrives, and that at that point, or you could use an EQ pedal for that. for that purpose as well. Some people use an EQ pedal for that. Then you would adjust it so that it would actually kick up the volume, because you'll notice if it's after the overdrive, the volume will actually get louder when you hit it. Like it'll boost you. It'll boost you. It's a solo boost, basically. That's what people use as a solo boost. But I would use this almost like another distortion pedal. It's like stacking distortion pedals. So then I would put this, I'd put my flanger first, I'd go into the fuzz, because I would use it as a boost and sometimes as a fuzz. And then I would go into my overdrive pedal, my Kaleen Pure Sky. So far, this is what we're looking at. We've got boost pedal first, then into the flanger. Not boost pedal, sorry, buffer pedal first, then into the flanger. And then we're into what's the boost and the fuzz. And then we go into the overdrive. So there you go, you got that so far. So now, I also have a phase 90 here, okay? Now, here we go, because this is what happens with pedals all the time. You're always like, all right, well, I gotta work another one in there because, I forgot to put my phase 90. Now, you could put this in the loop. You could. It's gonna be really heavily oscillating. Honestly, if you're using this in say an Eddie Van Halen capacity where you want it to add to your distortion, be like a cool effect on a solo, or just adding it as like a texture to your distortion, which is how a lot of people use these phase 90s. You would want the phase 90 to go before, it would go with your modulations before the distortion, if that's what you're doing. So, I'm gonna move this around because we, set something up here, but now we're actually kind of going somewhere else with this. I would put my phase 90 first because that's how I would do it. So we would go phase 90, then we'd want to put our modulation, our flanger, then we go into the boost for the overdrive, and then we've got the overdrive up here. For now, it's up here. I'm probably not gonna wire this whole thing up because it's gonna take forever and it's too much for you to watch. However, you can put it would go here. It would go there. And then, final in the chain, you'd want to do your reverbs or your delays, or if you've got a tremolo pedal, those usually go at the end. Sometimes people will put tremolo, say, before delay or reverb. That's personal preference, but generally speaking, anything like a reverb I would put last in the chain. Reverb's the very last thing that would go on the board. If you had a delay, I would put the delay right before the reverb. Yeah, so we would start out with the buffer pedal to keep our signal strong. Or that could be your tuner. If you had a Boss tuner or a TC Electronics tuner that has a built-in buffer, you could put your tuner first, and that would actually be your buffer pedal. Then I go into my modulations, because I like my modulations before my distortion, which makes the most sense for them to sound proper, I think. Unless you're playing a lot of clean and you want everything into the effects loop, that's a little bit different. So then we're in the phase 90, and then we go into the flanger. Kind of redundant having a phaser and a flanger back to back, but this is just for demonstration. And then we go into the fuzz, because that has a boost mode plus the fuzz. Then after that, we're going into the overdrive, which is the Kaleen Pure Sky, and then the digital delay. And that's a pretty straightforward, clean setup for a board. Now, let's say you're running an effects loop, and you're like, that's great, but I want to run some of my delays and my reverbs. Mostly it's like delay and reverb and a tremolo effect, or if you're using like a Boss TR2 or something, you'd run that into your effects loop. So, if you were doing that, same board, same everything, okay? Let's say you want to put, I want my flanger and my digital delay in the effects loop. Because a flanger could be a cleaner chorus sound if you want in the effects loop. So you would take, for me personally, the way I set up these boards if I'm using the effects loop is I'll put the effects loop stuff on the top, and I'll keep the stuff that's going straight into the end on the bottom. So just moving it around a little bit. So now, what's on this top row is what would be running into my effects loop, my send and return on the amp. So, bottom's going straight into the amp, and the top is going into the effects loop. So you just, you'd run your cord right into your buffer or your tuner, goes right through your distortions. Then you would plug out from the overdrive straight into the front of your amp. And that's like your main 4 pedals right there. And then you would just run send and return the top 2 pedals into your effects loop on your amp. Now I do that with the Roland JC40 because it has a nice sounding effects loop, and the delay sounds really good in the effects loop. If I'm using like a Fender style amp where there is no effects loop, I'm just running straight into the amp. It doesn't really make a difference. So it's just all like 4 pedals in a row straight to the front of the amp. Because you're running clean mostly on those amps, clean or just mildly breaking up, unless you're using heavier distortion. But even if you are, you don't really have an option for an effects loop, so you can't use an effects loop anyway. So it's not really even something you can talk about or discuss because there's nothing you can do there. As far as cables are concerned, these, for me, if you're doing like a pedal board at home, this is what I use. These are these little Ernie Ball. They're actually Ernie Ball like patch cables. I find these little pancake Ernie Ball cables, they work really well. And honestly, I haven't had any problems with them. Like no breaks, no nothing, and I use these things over and over and over again. I'm always taking the pedal board apart and putting them back together. Because I'm only running 6 pedals, so, you know what I mean? I'm constantly changing things out all the time. Now if you were touring, or if you were playing out, you'd probably put the board together and keep it together. But these are fine. You can also, they sell solderless cable kits that you can make them yourself, where you basically put them together and you make them just the right amount of space in between pedals. But I don't, as you can see, you plug these in, they're very inconspicuous. They don't really take up a lot of space on the board. So going from one pedal to the next, you can run these cables all the way across, and they don't take up a lot of space. They're small. They are, they work well. They're good for your sound quality. Like, they don't suck tone a lot. So the one spot comes with its own cables. These are the power cables that obviously you'd run your power cables, plug them in. These do have these things that I don't really use, but the NUX board comes with these plastic clamp things. These are cable management ties, basically. I mean, for 6 pedals like this, I don't really bother with the cable management. I just try to keep my cables short so they're not hanging out all over the place. Honestly, with this bag and this pedal board, for me, this works out to whatever I need. I can set this up and I'll be fine for a whole gig or a recording session or whatever it is that I'm doing. I don't need more than 6 pedals. And I find once you get over 5 or 6 pedals, that's when you really start to hear the tone sound. That's when the tone of your guitar and your amp starts to change. Now some people like that. Some people actually like to have that that tonal shift. They like it darker, so they do that. Like some people will use those coily chords, like old school, like bungee looking, like they look like phone cords from back in the day. They sell cords like that a lot. Some people will use those because they actually do suck your tone, but they like the effect of that. A lot of people play strats into like a bright amp. We'll do that to kind of tone down the brightness. Yeah, I find that this whole setup works really well for me, and I have no complaints about this NUX pedal board. Like I said, this particular one runs for $100. This is just the right size for me. I mean, I could fit easily 8 pedals on here if I wanted to, and if you had a power supply that would work it. Or you could run a couple pedals on battery power and then just plug the rest into the power supply. But you could do like an 8 pedal board on this. If you were using mini pedals, you could get a lot more than 8 pedals on this, easily. But I mean, that's up to the individual. That's up to what you want to do, like what your intention is and what you're trying to do. So I hope this video has been helpful. Like I say all the time, if you like this kind of content, like, subscribe, leave a comment, check out my other videos. I got a bunch up now. Yeah, anything helps. I'm I'm trying to keep this channel going. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I've been Jay Byrne, and this is the Effects Loop. See you next time.